Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Wow Ergonomics. It's Friday. I'm sorry we're a little bit late. That's due to the technical issues that we've been facing this morning, which is mainly that Stephen ran out of coffee, wasn't
it? You can't blame me. It was a caffeine issue. So
it was a caffeine issue. There you
yes.
go. We're going to get straight on with introducing our special guest today, because we know that you've all been waiting for this man, not only to come on today, but just for him to come on to this show. It seems like 2 years in the waiting, but finally we managed to get the king of ergonomics himself.
Easy for you to say.
No, it wasn't.
No.
Here, it's Guy Osmond. Hello.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. And let's just start by saying the lateness is entirely my responsibility. I've been swapping around Bluetooth connections and headsets and everything. Usual story, all working, 10 o'clock this morning, no sound at all at 11:45. So I apologize. But I'm here now. Thank you for the build-up. I'll try and live up to a little bit of it, Graham. But since we are so late, I'd probably better if I just shut up for a moment and let you get things going, shall I?
Well, no, not at all. Not at all. And you bring the charisma today, which is great. And I'm going to start with that there, because I know we discussed what sort of topics we're going to talk about today, and we put a little bit of that in the chat beforehand. But the thing I want to get you on is, I asked everybody out there this morning. You might know I do a poll every morning on LinkedIn, but I said, what's more important on social media? Is it content or charisma? I'd just like your opinion on that.
Well, you know, I'm deeply shallow, so I'm not too big on the whole content thing. I think it's got to be a balance. I mean, what is interesting is we try to put out valuable, useful stuff all the time. Obviously, a bit of it's marketing and pitch for the business. That's part of what it's all about. But we try to provide, obviously, resources. And I've just seen Ben's comment. Thank you, Ben. Ben's only new to the industry, as you know, so he doesn't know me very well yet. He may live to regret a comment like that. So, but coming back to it, I think that you've got to provide good, useful, valuable stuff. But the frustration is the ones that you put out where you just do something silly. They're the ones that get all the shares, all the stuff. I mean, I had a brilliant quote from Neil Usher, whom you may know, who's been very active on social media, well-known, highly regarded pundit, commentator, speaker, author. And he put a comment on recently. I won't quote exactly the words that were used, but the gist of it was that he had been trying to put really useful content out for however many years. And the first one that he wore a pink wig got bigger following, bigger shares, bigger coverage than anything, bigger reach than anything else he'd done. So I think the reality is those of us who are doing it to add value to the online community need to be putting good stuff. But we try to get a bit of humor into it, and but that's dangerous as well, because people don't always get it, and that sort of thing. So I mean, what was the poll outcome? So I've been a usual thing. I've gone around in circles, not really answered the question. I think there has to be good content, but you need to have a voice that people want to listen to.
It's actually a very, very close 50-50 split at the moment, and I think that.
Were there only two options, Graham? Sorry, I didn't see.
There was a third option as well, which is basically to see if people were thick. But the two main options, which were it's charisma or it's content. My personal view is, I agree with you. I think it sits, and that's what I was saying just before you came on. I think it sits with both, but I think we do have to understand that we live in a world of influencers. We live in a world of being entertained and everything having to get over as quickly as possible these days in the kind of scroll by world. So if we believe that we can just offer value, but we don't do it in an entertaining way, or we don't do it in a way that will actually grab someone's attention as it goes past, we're sadly mistaken. Unfortunately, we do need to grab people's attention. So I think it's a good mix of both. But yeah, coming back to your comment about the comedy or the humor, I think that's a really interesting point. And one of the things I've picked up on over the last few years with that in particular is how that doesn't translate globally in particular. Yes. What we might find funny in the UK doesn't necessarily work if you then take that over to a Scandinavian country, for example. So but being culturally relevant in there as well and relevant to your audience is really important. Anyway, that's not quite what we're here to discuss this morning. For anyone that doesn't know Guy Osmond,
that's not possible.
Oh no, there's lots. There's lots that wish they did.
And actually, look, let's face it. There may be a lot of people that actually will watch this over the next couple of days that won't know Guy Osmond. So just introduce yourself first and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, the only reason I know lots of people is obviously I'm incredibly old, and I have been in. I was actually in a conversation this morning. I mean, I've got some of my staff who cannot believe that I have watches and shoes that are older than them, and just can't believe it. So, and in fact, we actually literally in a conversation this morning with somebody that my wife and I have been together 46 years, and I've got staff.
Congratulations.
They can't picture living for 46 years, let alone actually being, cohabiting with one person for. Actually, we were old school. We didn't live together until we got married. So there were 6 years of us both hanging around for a better offer that nothing came for either of us. So we got married and got on with it. But, sorry, what was the question? Yeah. Well, who am I? Right. So,
who are you?
So Guy Osmond, I've been in workplace ergonomics for 30 years. We set up the website ergonomics.co.uk because I thought this interweb thing might take off in due course. And interestingly, we registered before what was then the Ergonomic Society, registered ergonomics.org.uk. So I got into it through back problems. I put my back out. I'd had an injury from early on, a work-related one actually, working for my father back in the days when small business had never heard of health and safety, let alone knew what to do and how to do it. And so many, many moons ago, that was how it started. Went to see my GP when I had a relapse into a really quite acute back pain. She referred me to her husband, who is a rheumatologist. He had invented a thing at the time called the desktop desk, which is interesting. We're now supplying a lot of rather different desktop desk adapters.
Right.
But this was a sloping thing, and the idea was that it created like the old school idea of having a sloping thing to put your keyboard on with a forearm support, and the screen in those days before flat screens, the monitor then went on a platform behind it. And we had another business in the family at the time that had carpenters and wood processing machinery. So we started making that under license to Salisbury District Hospital. Then sort of got going, and I rapidly discovered that we needed some chairs because we need to start moving towards a sort of more broad, what we would now call a holistic approach. So we came across a company called Pelvic Posture, and they no longer exist. They sold out to Pledge many moons ago. And then the first exhibition we did was it was a health and safety exhibition at Olympia, again, aging myself. And we literally showed this one sloping product. And again, show how much I knew. We actually had a big tub of mint imperials and put a label on it saying industrial strength paracetamol. And, when the first health and safety managers came on and said, do you know anything about Kosh? Then we all started, and I suddenly thought, right, I need to learn some more. So I came into it knowing very little. I now know quite a lot, but again, I was saying deeply shallow. So I know enough to get by in lots of different conversations, and then basically surround myself by really clever, knowledgeable people to cover for my own inadequacies, really.
Is he referring to me and you there, Graham, with these intelligent people?
Well, that's where we are today. Let's tell it comes, Steve.
Well, probably not. But actually, going back to the previous conversation there, you demonstrated real charisma there, and you know, you found a way of cutting through the noise with that, putting those mint imperials there and pretending they were painkillers. Because, you know, there would have been quite a lot of interest in that, I guess.
Yeah, there was, and not also because what we'd done is borrowed my sister-in-law at the time had a clothing shop, and we had a mannequin which was not a traditional one that you sort of see on a pole, but a sort of floppy, almost like a sort of rag doll type thing. So we borrowed a dress, I think probably from my wife, put this mannequin and just had her slumped over the desk. So again, I think that the sort of what we represented, I think maybe was a bit prescient, but clearly I didn't really know what the hell we were doing at that time. It was a case of, you know, you can't establish your market until you get out there and sort of see what the consumers, whatever they shape or form they take, what they're looking for. And that really, and interestingly, we then launched a couple of other products, a footrest and a monitor stand. And we started to deal pretty quickly with London Electricity and Boots. And the first intro was, again, very lucky. I think I met an ergonomist, she's now retired, called Lynn McAtamney. That may mean nothing to most people but many will know Ruler, Rapid Upper Limb Assessment, which is an ergonomics measuring tool, a sort of risk assessment tool. And Lynn invented the Ruler as part of either a MSc or a PhD thesis. So again, we met some. I suppose I just found some interesting people that gave me a push in the right direction. And although I still have no qualifications in ergonomics, I know many. You know, I know hundreds of physios, and I know lots of osteos, chiropractors. You know, it's just that's the way it sort of evolves, really.
We want to talk mainly today about the way that the world has changed in the last few years. And or has it? I mean, that's the other. Well, you know, in terms of the world of work, do we think it has really changed, or was it an evolution that was just happening anyway? And what we've just seen is, you know, a sort of exaggeration of where it was going, but you know, it's happened a lot quicker than it would have done just because COVID and lockdown came about. What's your kind of views on that?
So my serious answer is it has changed monumentally. I think the biggest problem with that is management in business is really struggling. I was going to say to get ahead of the game. Most of them are struggling to get somewhere near close to catching up. Even in big organizations, there's still, you know, the ones who are really working on it still have a strong realization that the route they're going may or may not be right, and only time will tell. But I think what COVID has been really useful for, I mean, there's several reasons. I actually rather liked COVID. I know it's a bit of a sort of counterintuitive thing, but I love a lockdown, because when you're delivering a chair to somebody at home, with a lockdown, at least they're going to bloody well be in. So you know, you can do it first time every time. Whereas actually, you know, a lot of our business now is delivering stuff to people at home, and it is a nightmare just getting hold of people and scheduling and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But coming back to it, I think the most useful thing that's come out, and I think that is really significant, because I think probably it wouldn't really have come out if it had just edged along, as most things do over time in evolution, is the recognition that everybody's different. And finally, we've got that. To me, it's interesting. A bit of me thinking I've been banging on about that for 30 years and I wasn't making any progress at all. And all I need is a quick little pandemic and suddenly everybody gets it. But the thing that's really brought it out is actually the awareness of mental health. We've always, or our focus has been physical health, musculoskeletal health. There's a conversation that we were already having before COVID, but it's become much more commonplace now, which is that mental and physical health are completely and utterly intertwined. So that recognition is something that's come to the forefront. And the second thing that's come out of that is by now, I was at the Institute of an IWFM, Institute of Workplace and Facilities Managers, the Southwestern session in Bristol on Tuesday. And every single session, with the exception of the bloke talking about property values, neurodiversity came up in the session, whether it was about sustainability, whether it was a test case, whatever the various different conversations were, designing new premises. And I think that's something that is really quite useful to just see that the uniqueness thing has come out of. I think that's I suppose really it's okay to say you need help. That's the one thing, and whatever that help is, and very often people, they thought they needed help for a while. They've kept quiet because they weren't confident where that would go. And now quite often they still don't actually know what help they need, but they just, that opportunity to have a voice and just say, look, I seem to be having issues that other people aren't. And it's not because I'm not motivated. It's not because I'm doing my best. It's just because there are certain things I struggle with. And I think that's the main thing that I think probably might have come out over a very long period, but suddenly it's bang straight in front of us as soon as we started talking about mental health, and it became a very conspicuous, major issue because of the pandemic and the people home working and all those other things. That then brought us into the broader conversations. And I think that's a really big deal.
Graham, I was going to say, because there was a piece, and I'm sort of twisting into your sort of second love of music here, but there was something was on the radio, heard it yesterday or Wednesday, where I think it was Lewis Capaldi has cancelled 2 or 3 weeks worth of gigs he's got lined up, and he was actually calling out, his own mental health, his sort of self-awareness of his mental health. I think he said something, he hadn't been back home for 5 months or something like that. And it's interesting, as actually the more people who are sort of deemed famous or people can relate to doing this can only be a good thing, can't it? Because actually people will maybe start feeling a lot more comfortable if they see people doing it, that actually, do you know what, I can see a lot of my challenges within that. And I know they're working in a different sphere, but it's interesting that people are saying those things.
You're right, but at the same time, he's contracted to do that work. He's not now doing so let's bring it back to how business works, right? He's contracted to do those gigs. In some ways, you could argue he's letting fans down because he's not doing those gigs when they were planned. Yes, he'll reschedule those gigs, etc. All right. So that's a really great example in a way, because actually there's a problem that exists there in the first place, which is that those that are managing him aren't managing him well, because they've allowed him to get to a point of burnout and where this is suddenly a problem, which is actually something that we're seeing from the figures that are coming through in terms of a lot of people that have been working at home or remotely or in a hybrid way over the last couple of years. We're seeing increasing numbers of burnout, etc. So there's that management problem, but at the same time, there's a positivity in there in terms of being able to talk about it and come through. And Guy, that's what I was going to say to you is the biggest problem here, because you mentioned management are struggling with this, is the biggest problem the kind of narrative that management are trying to deal with, which is that for a business, it's all about being successful. And success means making money, profits, growing as a business. But is that, in a way, they're struggling to see how that is linked to well-being and everything else? Are they able to make those connections properly? Or is it, is at the moment, do we have too many accidental managers who have unfortunately gone into those positions and have got no understanding, no training, no kind of real understanding of how to be a manager, and they're struggling with this kind of strange narrative that's happening within the workplace at the moment?
I think there's lots of things in that. I think a lot of middle managers are being squeezed in both directions. A lot of them are under-resourced, both in terms of people working for them to get all the work done, but also in terms of support, that whatever they need. So I think there are middle managers have got members of staff now coming to them and saying, look, I need help. They probably almost certainly haven't got the knowledge, the training, or the experience to address that in any way, other than say, oh God, let's call HR. I think those who are supposedly the specialists, it's an accelerating thing. And what I expect to happen actually, as people are putting their hands up and saying, look, I need some help. Every time, my view is at this moment, every time somebody does that, then there's a load of people watching them, standing around saying, I want to see how this goes, because if this works for them, I want to be the next in line to be putting my hand up. So I think this is going to escalate. I mean, just as an example, I was doing some slightly sort of off-piece research recently, but apparently generally, in fact, I see from one of the comments, one of the delegates I think we were specifically talking to, somebody who's on this today, I was in a conversation with Chris Terry, and we're talking about, within the, yes, he's got a very valid point about the different things, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Conversation we're having with Chris, for example, ADHD diagnoses, GPs won't touch it now, and apparently depending where you are in the country, it's between 1 and 5 years wait to just get an appointment. But to come back and thank for the prompt, brilliant segue, Chris. So that I love that people can put in a comment and say, Guy Osmond, will you get back on track? Answer the bloody questions. So it's good that this stuff's coming up. So I think those motivations are different. The individuals, generally speaking, are doing the best they can, but they now realize that they need help and support. Probably their line managers are saying, I agree with you. I mean, some won't. Some will just say, there are still, and I come across some quite old school, I'll just stop whinging and get on with it. There's still quite a lot of that around. But generally speaking, I think the vast majority of managers, quite possibly because they're having the same sort of thoughts and feelings themselves because of the pressure they're under. But there are always the corporate directives. And it's really interesting to see how different big organizations respond and cope with all these various different situations. I mean, a good example directly in our historic sphere of the musculoskeletal and the physical issues, I'm convinced there are still millions of people working from home on a kitchen table with no laptop stand, no keyboard, chairs the wrong height, getting shoulder and neck pains all the time. And there are still employers who are saying, right, yes, we need to do that. We'll deal with it. But there are also what worryingly feels, and I've got no stats on this, but worryingly feels like a growing number of employers who are saying, if you can't work at home with what you've got, come into the office. And that sort of part is, that is I don't know, the motivation is probably a cost-saving exercise. In some circumstances, it's people actually are trying to get people back into the office without trying to find ways to do it without mandating it. But what I also think is definitely happening, again, this is intuitive, not based on any data, but I think inevitably what will come from that is there will be people at home with, let's deal momentarily with the musculoskeletal, who are going to keep quiet about it because they think as soon as I say I've got problems, I'm going to be hauled into the office and I don't want to be doing that. But by extrapolation, the same thing is going to apply with mental health, those same issues that people can't get help. So I think the enlightened employers are seeing, and there's loads and loads of data from people like Leisman and various others coming up with some really useful stuff. And Cardenas, we work with, their healthy working analytics is starting now to bring some really interesting data. When you've got enough data, you can start drilling down into it to make some conclusions, draw stuff out and sort of peel it apart. But I think there are many people working in organizations who are paying lip service to all this. That's always been the case, attitudes to well-being. What it says on the website bears very little resemblance to what it actually is happening in, at the coalface, so to speak. So as Chris commented, that there's different drivers for individuals. And I do think that there is this problem where I think there's a problem of some employers get it, some don't. Some get it, but are a bit, how the hell are we going to cope with it all? Inevitably, all this stuff costs money. Again, the conversation with Chris the other day, we were talking about, and specifically on that ADHD thing, it's 2 to 3, 4 grand for a full medical assessment. Well, if you can't get it quick enough on the NHS, and who's going to pay that is the employer, that's a lot of money. So I think there are these issues where it's all coming to light. Things need to be dealt with it. I think motivations at individual level, wherever they are in the organization, may be entirely the right motivation, but whether the financial or personnel resources are actually there. And I think in many cases, this actually could just be not just about the cost, the financial amount, and we've got people who can deal with all this stuff.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
And who understand this.
No, totally agree. I sat with a couple of people earlier in the week to have a discussion around the term hybrid in particular, because I find that a particularly interesting phrase or term that we've kind of plonked on top of working in this period. And actually, I don't think a lot of the time it's particularly useful, because before that we had a whole load of people talking about agile and flexible working in particular, which really flexible working is entirely possible, but flexible working again is going to be different things for different people. True flexibility doesn't mean everybody comes into the office 4 days a week, or you work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It might just be where you perhaps timeshare your job, or you work flexible hours, or you work through different systems in order to bring flexibility into your role. Hybrid seems to be a little bit more prescriptive to me as a term, and I get really concerned when I watch over things like LinkedIn and I see all of these polls or different questionnaires with like, don't you think we should have a 4-day working week? Or don't you think, it should be, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you come in the office? It's like, well, why are you trying to prescribe? Why do you think one size fits all for an organization? Surely that can't be the case. Surely you have to take each organization in turn, and you need to be asking the people. But one of the people that was on that conversation was a guy called Freddie Gilmore, who's involved in culture change, and he raised an important issue or important point there as well, which is that he wondered how many organizations are actually involving their customers in that thought process as well. How many people are actually saying, well, have you asked your clients, the ones that are going to pay into this organization, what they're happy with or not? And I just wanted your viewpoint on that as well, because I think that's an interesting point. It might be that your clients were really happy with having, these meetings via Zoom and don't necessarily always want to go back to face-to-face, or maybe that's important for them to have face-to-face. Have you actually asked what they want, so that actually you get a better understanding of where the priorities of this organization are, and then you can resource it properly? What's your view on that?
So I think the thing that's come out of all of this is actually the more we know and the more we try to understand, the more complicated it all becomes. Yeah. And obviously consultative processes are undoubtedly the ideal way to do. They are quite time consuming and costly often, and it's one of the reasons why people like Leesman Index, for example, their data is really valid, because it gives you indicators of what's happening across the globe. And then again, as I say, if there's enough data, you can pull bits out and say, well, that sort of applies to us and that doesn't, or these are in our business sector, pharmaceuticals, financial, construction, whatever. Because again, what can work before you even get down into the culture of the individual business and the needs of the individual employees, one financial institute will be, the culture will be very, very different from others, or construction company, whatever it happens to be. So I think that you've got I think there's absolutely no question about the fact that you have to involve your personnel in it, whether it's going to be through some sort of committee or whether it's going to be through champions. Interestingly, I was attending a guy called Simon Fanshawe, does a lot of work on diversity and inclusion. He made a very interesting comment in his talk at Health and Wellbeing a couple of months ago. He was saying, when you get your champions, if, for example, you're going to, and I'm slightly gone off piece, but it's all related, your diversity, I always do, but if you're looking at your diversity and you're looking for champions, be careful that people don't rush to volunteer because they have their own agenda. And so that's the other thing. You can actually get people together to sort of guide it in a particular direction. But if each of those come, or if some of those come with their specific angle they want to get on it, the risk skews it. And you actually end up with a committee trying to represent everybody who absolutely don't. So, and the customer thing, I think, I would say, in the broad sense, when we have regular meetings with clients, we talk quite holistically about the nature of the relationship and so forth. But again, that thing about virtual meetings or face-to-face, that's when you're dealing with a customer. That's not, XYZ PLC is a customer. What do they want? You're down to what does Fred Smith, who works for XYZ PLC, want? And his colleague, Joan Jones, actually wants to do something completely different. So we've got client contact, shall we say that, individuals within our client base who are moving towards more and more face-to-face. We've got others who made it pretty clear they're going to be doing virtual till retirement unless something dramatic changes. So I think you need to get involvement from as many parties as possible. You need to try and understand as much as possible. But again, within the resources of any organization, you've got to try and contain that to what you can handle, because otherwise you'll end up getting so many inputs and then they start to conflict with anything. And as tends to happen with big organizations, they go out to get feedback from everybody, and in the end nothing happens.
We've got some comments coming through. This is actually LinkedIn user, but this is actually Twyla, Stephen, but we need to get her to change her settings on that.
I get to do that.
People often prefer Zoom, but may not realise the benefits of face-to-face and vice versa. Sometimes our preferences aren't focused on best results, but rather on personal convenience, which kind of fits in with what you were saying there a minute ago.
And to comment on that just quickly, that from a commercial point of view, we should be just saying, you know what, let's just do it all virtually because we can get through so many more meetings in a day. There's no travel costs and all the rest. But actually, for that, the comment from whoever that was about this, what you miss out on from the personal interaction, the bits of chit chat around it and all the rest of it. And even from our point of view, when you walk into, particularly now, when you walk into an office, you get an idea of how many people are there. Does it still look like it did before COVID? Is it full of pods and phone boxes and all the rest of it? Are there laptop users? We get a whole feel about the nature of the business and actually a lot about the culture of the business, which helps us in the relationship. And you get little or nothing from that from Zoom or Teams meetings.
Just on top of that, because it was Twyla who's been with Bakker Elkhausen for a week now, and she and I were out yesterday, and it was really interesting. Something that maybe could have been done on Zoom was done face to face, and we just picked up on a conversation that was going on next to us that we then engaged with, and were really able to add some value from Twyla's experience of dealing with that client. And actually, it then turned into a potential opportunity and helping with a solution. Now, had that taken place on Zoom or Teams, we wouldn't have picked up that little bit of background noise, that little the mention of a client name and some experience. But by being there, you were able to then add a little bit of value, because it was like, okay, yeah, I've been through that situation, I've dealt with that organization, and just sort of an exchange of ideas and collaboration that wouldn't have taken place had we been sat there looking screen to screen, as it were.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at this. Sorry, go.
Sorry, no, Chris's comment here about staff going feral. I mean, Chris, you have my sympathy because it's obviously something you can't do anything about. The client, I would say, has a monumental cultural problem.
Yeah.
And so, we brought up culture already a few times. If you've got an organization where people don't want to go there ever and don't want to meet their colleagues, then there's one of two things that's about. If it's old individuals, then those individuals are probably square pegs in round holes and probably shouldn't be in the organization. But actually, if pretty much everybody is like that, then the organization really needs, they're the square peg in the round hole. They need to get their act together to accommodate their people. And that's a really simple, glib thing to say. It's a monumental task.
I wanted to just draw on something you were talking about there in the middle of that, which is about the way that offices are now being designed. We have seen a shift in terms of office design over this period as well. I think some people have struggled to know what the role of the office is, and therefore have looked to redesign. We spoke at length, didn't we, Stephen, in the middle of the pandemic about, do people really want to go back to rows of desks? Ultimately, you can do the grunt work sat at home, and when you're doing the grunt work, when you're focused there on your spreadsheet or whatever, do you really talk to everybody else in the office anyway? No, you don't. You just get on with it. We've all been in offices where you've just got rows of people working. There's no interaction between everyone. So I'm guessing that, and we've spoken to some people in the sort of A&D sector, there are more offices being built with more, shall we say, coffee shop type areas where, it's more collaborative, or there's creative areas where people can come together and do those things where the team can be creative together. But, is there still a need for sort of like workstations in offices? Where are you seeing the balance? What's actually happening out there from your perspective?
Well, the main thing is people are putting casters on everything, and that's
so they can move it.
But actually, what is emerging, things like pods, for example, mobile pods are suddenly a thing. Yeah. Because actually pods quite often can be, and sorry, for those who may not actually know what I mean by a pod typically is a room within a room, and it could be something, or there's lots of different terminology, but it could be something as some high-backed seats with a table in between. It could be a complete dedicated room with a sliding glass door. I'm using this term pod really to refer to all those different things. Or it could be like a little house that's open at the sides or open on one side, but people can just go in for some acoustic improvement and so forth. But we're seeing more and more of that last type appearing now with casters on them, so that you can push two together for a slightly bigger meeting, or you can put them in different parts of the floor plate, depending on what the needs are and what's going on at the time. But flexibility is flexibility in a different context from the way you were using it earlier, Graham, of the what's on the floor plate. Everybody's looking now at different types of things. And I mean, a couple of things I've picked up, I've heard in conversations or at sessions recently, is that there's a lot of, we talked historically about the 4 C's: collaboration, communication, concentration, and contemplation. And the last 2 C's were the ones, contemplation and concentration, were the ones that everybody at the start of COVID said, God, I'm so productive, because there were no office distractions and they were just getting on with it. But actually, and then when people say, well, let's get them in for meetings. Well, then the conversation, those, one of my favorite words, serendipitous meetings, that thing where you bump into somebody at the coffee, at the coffee machine or on the way to the loo or whatever it happens to be. You can't contrive those. They just happen. They wouldn't be serendipitous. See how cleverly I got it in twice there, same way.
Very good.
They wouldn't be, say it again, they wouldn't be serendipitous if you force people into having those meetings. So there's that sort of scenario. And then somebody said to me today, well, actually, you could have an office full of people, or an area with people, and actually all the people in the office have all got their headsets on or headphones because they just need focus to get onto it. And the person in the phone booth, the dedicated single person acoustic, small, tiny phone box sized room, they look like they're being completely antisocial, but actually they're on a Teams call with 20 colleagues. So they're being the most interactive and communicative compared to the other people sitting alongside them in an area supposedly designed for it. I mean, so we're seeing some furniture, some desk designs where collaboration things like what I would call like an old farmhouse kitchen table, great big tables, people can sit around, more informal. So I think, but again, it's where are we looking? You know, where I live in Dorset, if you went around, most of the employers were less than 20 people. It probably looks exactly like it did before COVID. And I'd say a high proportion would have people back working exactly as they did before COVID. I think the more dynamic employers are looking at how would you work? Can we be thinking about setting things out for some activity-based working designs so that people actually move around according to what they're doing? But if you talk to, it's interesting, I think manufacturers are now starting to move to respond to what employers are saying they needed. I think sort of early in COVID, they started making things they thought they could tell employers they wanted. And so I think that's moving on. Definitely sort of flexibility, not just a movement, but use of you know, how people are using them. So I'm glad Matt and I are sharing a word we like as well there. So so that whole thing where people actually, employers are saying, well, what are people going to do when they're in? And let's not assume they're coming in to collaborate, because actually they may, and this is it's partially generational, because younger people tend to have less resource. Those who are actually working in sharing a flat with 2 other people, they want to come to the office, partly because they can't focus at home. Again, people, you know, during lockdown, when there were couples with children doing, you know, a friend of mine said, if we get through the day and we haven't killed any children, it's been a good day. So there are all those stresses.
I think that was me, Guy, wasn't it? I think who said that to you. So I think that was me that said that to you.
Maybe it's a widely held view, Stephen. I think I got a feeling it was Jim from Orange Box, actually, but it doesn't matter. But I think what we're seeing now is actually all these sort of, again, it's back to the individuals, but the generalizations that we started to make, the trends we thought they saw, they're all becoming more and more nuanced now. So you can't just say young people want to come back in because they can't work at home and older people want to stay at home. There is an element to that, and there are definitely indicators that probably proportionally there's a lot of truth in that. But there will be people, you know, again, young people also, there's been talk that a lot of people, particularly those who just graduated, come into a job with a large organization in a big city. They've just moved, they've got no friends. Historically, those graduates, practically all of their social circle initially, till they find their feet, would be work colleagues. And so, you know, if they never see anybody, how the hell does that happen?
And I guess, and also as well, if you've got people, that encouragement for people to work from home, and I'm going back to very much down to MSKs and those sort of issues. But if people have got issues with their setup at home, you're actually making the problem worse, because you're almost encouraging them to go and work at poor workstations, aren't you? By not allowing them to come back in and sort of pushing that out there is potentially enhancing the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
I want to just bring you into another point then, which is which again is, Stephen, is something that we've talked quite a lot about over the last couple of years, which is, so how relevant then it is kind of HSE and guidance and, you know, general DSE assessments, when clearly we've got a workforce who are now disparate in terms of where they work. We've got people working hybrid. We've got people working from home. We've got an increasing amount of people working remotely. You know, we're going to have 3.8 billion people on the planet in remote work jobs by 2035. And we've got offices that are no longer necessarily just banks of desks, but they might be hot desking areas on casters that you can move about, and these pods, etc. How do you go tick, 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 tick down a list and assess? Surely you just can't anymore.
I think, well, first of all, Matt Birtles, who's the lead ergonomist at the HSC, actually responded to my post about this morning. So I might sidestep the question slightly just in case he's actually on this session. But although having said, I'm not even sure I've answered any of your questions this morning, so I might as well stay on that theme. But I think we've still got some organisations who are doing it in a traditional way. I think there are a lot who have historically dealt with the escalations, but I think the escalations are becoming more complicated. And I think my impression is overall the number of DSE assessments being done has come down quite significantly. Some of that may be simply for the reasons you're saying, that they're not necessarily relevant to how people work. But I do worry that actually there will be some time in the future, there will be problems where all this will come back to bite us because people have been neglected. I think there is another part of the whole DSE thing, which I always bang on about, which I think in many ways is almost more important than how high's your desk and where's your screen position, which is if DSE assessments are done properly, then there should be a lot of user training. And actually, a lot of stuff, I know we sell products and you have historically, Graham and Stephen, you work for a manufacturer, but actually what's really interesting, I was on a Zoom with an American ergonomist from California a few nights ago, and the way the American approach is just throw products at them. And partly that's a national culture, partly it's a litigious culture and all the rest of it. But Europe generally, we've always been big on the education piece. And actually, if you teach people what they're trying to achieve and they understand the objectives, actually, they'll probably find a couple of books to raise their laptop up and figure out what needs to be done. They will still need, a keyboard and a mouse, so you can stay in employment, Stephen. But the reality is, and us as well, I hope. But the reality is, if you just make people understand what it's all about, and people want to know. When we go through this process with people, they say, that's brilliant. I just never thought of that. And we constantly look at ourselves thinking, God, we take so much for granted.
So is it about a change then? And this conversation I've had with lots of people, is it about a change from assessing what's potentially wrong and then assessing that someone's had the education and the training to be able to assess what is wrong and know potentially where to go to put it right? So should the shift be more towards like, I have had training in this, I have had training in this, and I now have an understanding of this. I mean, you've recently this week done some awareness training with Dan Williams, for example. How many organizations actually have any understanding or any awareness of how to accommodate or help somebody that's got a visual impairment?
Yeah.
Well,
I think I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a need, whether there will be a suitable response. I think there will be a need for organizations to just monumentally up their game in the whole awareness arena. And you mentioned the visual impairment awareness that we did with Dan, and it was amazing. I mean, every single person who did it said, and you might have seen it, it was a life skill they gained. It wasn't just about how to deal with people with vision impairment at work. They're actually, although one of my colleagues did say, so I'd feel confident to walk up to a stranger and ask if I could touch them. I said, I think we need to put that in context. And we're talking about, when somebody's got a vision impairment, actually, how do you get into a conversation with them and then say, do you want some guidance? And then obviously say, if I take your arm, is that easier for you? Can I do that? But, a really trivial thing, our fire escape at the office, it turns out because of the way it's designed, it's metal with a concrete slab at the bottom, which is the final step. The final concrete slab has no banister. We've been there 23 years, and yesterday, almost everybody commented on it. Prior to yesterday, nobody had even noticed. And I mean, that sounds like a trivial thing, but to me, that's a really clear indicator of just how much we take for granted in that sort of whole holistic approach to inclusivity and well-being generally.
I think it's the way to go, because I just think that if we understand, if we educate and provide that education within our teams, we help our leaders to be leaders and don't just expect them to know how to lead, then ultimately we start to come full circle on all of this and that, and then we create the culture that will allow an organization to thrive, because we're, together we look for the solutions. I think we've had such a responsive culture for so long with regards to a lot of things to do with health and safety and diversity and well-being, and we need to change that. As you say, we need to change that around. It is the part of the light on the horizon that we are breeding a new type of CEO these days, Guy, that has a different focus?
I think we will be. I'm not sure we're there yet. I think there is no doubt that younger staff, and I don't want to sort of do the generational tags, but there is no question that the questions that young people ask and when they're looking to change job are much more holistic. And so that, I mean, a lot of that sustainability is a really big part of that as well. And I know that's nothing to do with this topic, but they all do fit together. There's a way that all of these things, considering well-being, you could slightly extrapolate it, but the well-being of the planet is intrinsically tied to the well-being of individuals and vice versa. And so I think young people now coming into work, I mean, my son's recruiting at the moment. He was saying a 30-year-old wanted to have a really clear understanding of he's with a bank, what their ESG policies were, and wanted to know whether she could be involved in that, in the team that take responsibility, or could be a champion for it. And it was almost, he said, it was almost what she could get out of being involved with the ESG process was almost more important than the quite significant salary rise she was being offered as well. So I think what's happened in COVID out of all of this, it's enabled conversations to be had that didn't happen before, as I was saying sort of earlier on. And also that actually it means that where you can have those conversations, there is the opportunity to open it up in a way that everybody can benefit from, I think.
It's been a great conversation today, hasn't it, Stephen?
I think it's got to be part one, surely. Guy's got to come back. I did say this would be the start of some sort of potential trilogy, wouldn't it, with Guy Osmond?
Well, thank you very much. You better see.
Next time he'll answer the questions that you ask Graham as well. He promises. So.
I was going to say, have I answered any of your questions? And if I have,
yes, you have.
Well, bloody hell, that's a miracle, I can say.
Yeah,
no,
we'll have a whole load we left for episode 2, I think, haven't we?
Yeah. Guy, thank you so much for coming on.
You.
Thanks for the time, and thanks for everybody that put their comments in as well. Another session would be great. There you are.
Back by popular demand. We can officially say that next time,
must
Guy.
Be somebody like Ben, who's only known me for about 6 weeks. So, yeah.
Surname's Osmond, I think. Is it?
Yeah.
G. Osmond.
Well, I did tag my son on LinkedIn this morning. He said, "Thank you for the invitation, but I do have more important things to do." So he categorically isn't on it.
There you go. Thanks to Guy for coming in today. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please do share it with other people. Do comment and keep it going round so that we get more thoughts and comments over the next few days. If you're listening to this back on that Spotify type thing, I hope you've enjoyed it. Hope it didn't make you crash your car, because that would be awful from people that are involved in the health and safety business. We will be back same time, same place next week with another Wow Ergonomics. Until then, it's been myself, Stephen Howe, and the wonderful Guy Osmond as a guest.
Thanks very much, guys.
Bye for now. Thank you.